This is the Other 22 Hours podcast. Hey, and welcome to this week's episode of the Other 22 Hours podcast. We have officially made it. This is the final episode of 2025, and I am still your host, Aaron Shafer-Haiss.
And I'm your other host, Michaela Anne. We're so happy to still be here at the end of our second year, and we will be back for a third year.
Before we jump into today's episode, as you guys know, we have just 3 quick asks. You guys have been an incredible community and continue to be. If you have heard our show before and know that you like what you hear and what we put out there, if you could just do a few things. First thing is to subscribe on whatever you're listening to or watching. We know that most of y'all that watch on YouTube aren't subscribed. Please do it. It helps. And secondly, to share. Word of mouth is amazing. However you heard about our show, if there is somebody in your circle that doesn't know about it, just send them your favorite episode. And lastly, if you would like to directly support our show, we have a Patreon community that is ever growing, ever evolving, small but mighty, and about the cost of a mediocre coffee from Dunkin' Donuts. If that interests you, there is a link below in the show notes.
And one of the things we really pride ourselves on for this podcast is that we are not journalists. We are musicians ourselves. So instead of calling these interviews, we really think of them as just conversations. Like we're sitting around the kitchen table talking about the very honest realities of what it is to build a lifelong career on your art.
Which is wild, for sure. And so we've distilled that all down to the underlying question, what do you do to create sustainability in your life so that you can sustain your creativity? And today we got to ask that question of Chuck Prophet.
Chuck Prophet is a San Francisco-based musician. He got his start in the 80s in the psychedelic desert rock group Green on Red. He's been putting out solo records since the 90s. He's one of my personal favorites. We talk about it in the episode, but we met him in 2020, right before the pandemic hit, when we played in San Francisco and he came to my show. We were label mates at the time on Yep Rock, and it just started my infatuation with his records, particularly Night Surfer. I'll let Aaron take away what else he's done after I've gushed about just what a fan I am of his music.
Yeah, on top of playing in his rock band Green on Red and touring the world and making records all over the world with them, he's also worked with Bruce Springsteen, Richey, Kelly Willis, Alejandro Escovedo, Tony Visconti, a lot of really cool people that make really cool music and have really moved the marker. And you can hear it in our conversation with Chuck. We talk about being in a band, first being solo, stepping into the scene in Nashville, which was completely out of his wheelhouse at the time, and coming here for rights. We talk about the city of San Francisco itself and how inspiring that is and how there's so many diverse art forms there and how that's really important. We talk about the fact that the music industry is pretty pedestrian these days and we need some more danger in it.
Too many well-adjusted people, in direct contradiction of the foundation of this podcast, probably.
Yeah, our bad. Sorry, Chuck. One last note, our editor will make it sound amazing, but this whole conversation, it was like one of those really annoying internet delays. So if you hear some awkward pauses, it was a great conversation where we had to do the early 2000s cell phone thing where we say something and then wait and then get cut off and jerk and all that. Just wanted to raise that because Chuck is such a funny guy. He's so witty and so quick. You'll hear it in our conversation. So without further ado, here's our conversation with Chuck Prophet.
I'm back in pandemic. Normally I just use my phone, but I thought, I'll stack some books and I'll get an SM7. I got one down there. And so here we are. I went the extra mile, so you guys better bring it.
So we better go the extra mile too.
You better bring it, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Thank you for agreeing to come and chat with us. Are you home in San Francisco now?
Yeah, this is San Francisco. I'm at my so-called office. It's just kind of a shoebox-sized space that I rent in the ghetto and in the heart of it. And it's a place that I work, and I don't really record, but it's where I write and stare out the window.
I take it it's a separate spot from your house, or is it in the same
building?
building?
By all means, yeah. First of all, my wife Stephanie and I, we work together, and we've worked together for years, and we live in a pretty small apartment. I was thinking this morning about all the people I've co-written with, and I realized that every one of those was like a lesson. They all became teachers. And I remember years ago writing with Jules Shear, and he had a designated place to write. And I thought, wow, I guess maybe that's what I need. So I do have a designated place to write, co-write or shout at the walls. And I should have done it a long time ago.
Yeah, it makes a difference. I was just thinking about how my office is my writing room, but it's also where I do all of business. So it's not exactly inspiring because
Oh, yeah.
that's another challenge of, is it where you're answering emails and approving graphic designs for records and stuff, and then you're also trying to write in the same space?
It's a lot better than when all that stuff was at home, because you can never really get away from it, and it's going to be nagging you. And, there's always something to do. I try to be responsible about returning emails and things like that. There are times when, who cares?
Yeah.
It's hard to know. I think we all as artists do things to make us feel good. And sometimes that can be just spinning your wheels. I have to have a place that I can go. But if I come down here and just do emails and shuffle papers around, I guess that's what I do. But I got to be here. I may not do anything creative. I might sit here for 8 hours and just take care of some mundane stuff. And then in the 8th hour, something might happen. It's called showing up, I guess. It's my happy place also.
Yeah. What was it? Chuck Close, the artist, he has that famous quote that I'm paraphrasing and obviously not saying it nearly as eloquently as he did, but basically amateurs wait for inspiration and for the muse to show up. Those of us that have been lucky enough to be able to call our creativity and our art our career, we just show up and make things happen, more or less. Just keep showing up and keep being there.
It's interesting because my wife, Stephanie, she moves at her own tempo, and she's made a couple records over the years, and she's been writing lately, and she's written some great songs. Her thing with me is she says, I've written some songs, but I can't grind it out like you do. That's her image of me anyway. I don't know if I grind anything out. I worry things into the ground. I can overthink anything.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, I was speaking to someone at Yep Rock, and they said, I think you're overthinking this. And I made a mental note. I said, yeah, well, there's a place in hell for all the people who told me that I overthink things, and you're there now.
Oh, I wonder who that was.
So I can overthink anything. I can't grind it out. It came at me.
Yeah.
I didn't consider it insulting or anything. I just have the ability to roll things around from beaker to beaker.
Made the potion. We live in Nashville now. We've been here for about 10 years and moved here from Brooklyn, New York. And when we first got here, it was within the first 6 months of being here. I heard somebody say, in the typical Southern dialect of having short sentences to say a lot, somebody told me you can't plow a field by turning it over in your head.
Oh, that's cute.
'Cause I'm all up in my head.
I love Nashville. I've spent a lot of time there over the years. And met some of my best friends I met there, and I was lucky to come there at a time when I needed it, really. I don't go there as much as I used to.
Yeah, the people here are really what make it for us. I think because we lived in New York City for 10 years, we wish we lived in a walkable city in some ways. But I think the community of musicians is just really strong here, and you really can't replace that, where you can decide, I want to record a song tomorrow and call just some of the best musicians and have them over and write together. That's what's so wonderful about being here.
Yeah, when I went there, I had been in bands. We'd been signed. We'd been dropped. I made a couple solo records. I got signed. I was kind of banged up, and I really didn't have any prospects or much of anything going on. And I live here in San Francisco, day to day. It's just not that kind of place. When I went to Nashville, I ended up writing with a lot of people that I probably wouldn't know in normal life or have anything in common with, but they were always professional. And the idea was to wrestle an idea to the ground and get out of there. And so learned a lot. And then I also made some lifelong friends. It was a great experience for me. And the thing is that there were a lot of people my age that had been through the ringer, and they found themselves in Nashville in a writing community. I thought it was cool. It's interesting because I would listen to country radio occasionally, and I heard this song, Believe Me, Baby, I Lied. It was a Trisha Yearwood song, #1 record, as it turns out. And it was written by some people you probably know, Angelo Petraglia, Larry Gottlieb, and of course, Kim Richey. And on my first trip, I think I ended up writing with all those people. To me, just mind-blowing, to be in a room with them. And we're still all friends. I haven't seen Gottlieb in ages, but he's a character, Larry Gottlieb. Worth seeking out. But so Nashville was a great place.
Yeah, I love Kim Richey. I know you've worked with her, and we've attempted a few times to write together. And what often happens is that we sit and talk for like the whole time. And then we're like, shit, we got to go. So we've yet to finish a song. We mostly just get together and talk shit together.
I see. Well, that's all part of it.
We need the follow-up. You need like the first session when you haven't seen each other in a while to talk it out and then come back the next day and actually get the song on the page, I think is the plan of action.
Well, it helps, you know. I mean, Kim is a pretty gifted writer. There's not really very many people like her, and she's also a really honest, you know, natural writer. She has her antenna up, and to get some music going, she generally pulls things out through the music. She's just the best, man, and funny.
Yeah. You mentioned that it was a time when you came to Nashville, there was a group of people around your age that you all had been through the ringer. Do you remember what age in your life that was?
33, 34, you know, pushing my mid-30s. I mean, Nashville was a different place. It was almost a place you could describe as like a science fiction movie where they'd killed all the young people. There really weren't any young people. Angela started working with the Kings of Leon, and we started seeing another generation of kids, you know, which is great, and which is where you are today, you know. But yeah, it was a strange. I'd made a record there. Green on Red, my old band, we made a record at the Sound Emporium in the smaller room, probably in like 91 or something. And I remember Dolly Parton was in the big room, and we just kind of walked in there a couple times and just watched the sessions. You know, nobody cared. We were drinking a lot back then, and we would always go to writers' nights or whatever was happening. We had our rental car, and I think we were staying at the Holiday Inn over on Vanderbilt. Is that it? Used to be a Tower Records over there. But yeah, we would go out to those writers' nights, and there would be whoever cut this song back in 79. It was really good for me, and it was very fascinating. And I think the Bluebird was there at the time as well. We would drive around and listen to music and look for trouble.
I'm always curious about like, the age because we're in our mid-late 30s, and one of the things with this podcast is we've noticed there's a lot of young people now in Nashville, but we've made it a thing of we want to talk to people who are at least a few album cycles into their career or at least like a decade. We will make exceptions, but we've noticed within our own community, it's important to kind of go through the ringer. You have
Skin
like
your knees a few times.
Yeah, you have like a different perspective versus like the naive, beautiful enthusiasm of your 20s. Then getting through the ringer and staying committed to this, that's what we really want to talk to people about. People who've been roughed up and are still doing it.
There's so much to learn about the art form and the process of making records, and you're going to make mistakes and you're going to learn things. There are times when you're going to be uncomfortable, but if you don't push through, then you just don't grow. No how else to say it.
I've noted in my own life that when things are going well or smoothly or things are coming easily, I don't necessarily learn anything. But if I'm getting beat up and things aren't quite going my way or whatever it might be, I learn really quickly.
Yeah, well, I learned very slowly, but I get it.
When you kind of were in that period of time where you went through the ringer and didn't have any prospects, what kind of kept you going? Because I'm assuming there was a turning point where all of a sudden you did get some prospects and know that you started putting out solo records and have had a couple different indie record deals with New West and then now still with Yep Rock. What was that experience for you of feeling like, is anything going to happen? And how did you kind of stay your course? And where was the turning point?
I was on a British label, British major label that was an affiliate of Warner Brothers. And I made a record in 95 called Feast of Hearts. And it looked like it was going to come out in the States. And then it looked like maybe it wasn't going to come out. And then clearly it didn't come out. And we'd done a few showcases. And when that was over, I thought maybe I would like write for television or something. I don't know. I did have a publisher somewhere around then. And I made a couple independent records for a label in England called Cooking Vinyl. And my publisher had the idea to send me to Nashville, really. He'd had experience with people like Big Al Anderson and wasn't very kind to me about being an artist or a performer. And so that kind of wasn't on the table, but decided that I could be a writer. And that's when I went to Nashville and I had some appointments and some co-writes and people I didn't really know. And it was a good time for me because it kept me engaged. And the thing is that there's always something going on. You're writing, or somebody's making a demo, or somebody's playing the showcase, or there's always something going on. And I think that was probably pretty healthy for me. That would have been 97 or something, 97, 98 there.
Sometimes we can see with ourselves and with artists, if we're in a kind of a down flux or wondering what our prospects are, of like the keeping engaged in some other way is really helpful to keep you creatively nourished, also distracted. So like if you're not having a lot of touring opportunities at the time and that's like weighing on you, and then engaging in this other way of, oh, okay, there's some opportunities to write, that helps you like not wallow and dwell in a way, and focusing on what's not flowing and kind of being open to these other channels.
I always stayed busy in some way or another. I'd play guitar in other bands. I've written. The thing that I enjoyed about Nashville was that I never saw this coming, but all the things that I'd learned being in a band, it's a self-taught art form, and nobody really tells you how to do it. So if you're in a band, you might say, well, let's go to a bridge, or let's go to some other place here, and maybe it'll be fresh when we go back to the other part. It feels good. A lot of songs do that, I've noticed. And so all the things that I learned playing in bands since the time I was like 12 or whatever, it actually helped me. I remember writing with Dan Penn, and he said that early on, the thing that kept him going was that he wanted to hear his music coming out of the big speakers. Here's a guy from Alabama. He's got a little publishing deal, and if you could write something strong enough, then Rick Hall, his publisher, would let him go into the big studio. And they were engineering themselves. And I understand that. Sometimes it's just, well, we want to get this together just enough to do the gig. So you're getting ready for a gig, or you're getting over it. But the writing stuff, it's kind of a self-taught art form. And so I was happy that all those things helped me, because I was pretty intimidated to just go into a room at the BMI building or whatever with a stranger. But I was surprised that the things that I'd learned along the way actually were able to be useful.
You're kind of touching on a subject that I'm always really interested in, coming and getting your start as part of a band, and then setting off and doing everything yourself. So not only the creativity, but just like the direction, the motivation, the momentum, all of that. Did you find it was a adjustment period for you across the board, not just with the writing?
I was lucky in so many ways. And one of the things is I had my kite up and the wind changed direction. And there was a time when Green on Red kind of disintegrated. I started playing solo gigs in San Francisco. And there were some places here like the Paradise and the Albion and these rooms that we would play. And we would end up doing 3 sets a night just by necessity. Stephanie and I, she would play accordion, I would play guitar, and we'd have rhythm sections, but just through doing it. And then I got a deal in England, and we started touring the UK up and down the Angry Island, playing every pub and Leeds and Sheffield. And just by doing it, we actually started to get good, confident. And all those bar band gigs really came in handy because, audiences in the UK can be pretty salty, and, you got to have that experience. And I loved it. Still do. It's still one of my best markets and one of my favorite places to play. I look around now, I don't know if that's as easy for people. Get in the time.
Yeah, we see that here too. It's like there's such a focus on like, I want to play these big theaters. I want to do all that. And I started playing gigs when I was like 14 years old. I grew up in Maine, so there wasn't a ton of gigs. But as soon as my friend got his license, we were driving all over and playing every brick oven pizza place and bookshop in Maine that would have 3 high school kids to play music. And then when Michaela and I met in Brooklyn, I played so many gigs. There were 2, 3 sets in weird places, in weird corners.
Italian restaurants and
getting in the way of people waiting in line to buy a coffee, like wherever.
Sure.
Playing on the street. I played in like a brass band with a trumpet player, a tuba player, and myself. We'd play on the street, walk into bars and play. And at the end of a night, we'd walk away with a few $100 a person, just wherever we could.
We thought we were living large when we got paid like $300 and a meal.
Yeah, exactly. This is a great gig.
Yeah,
those are great gigs.
Yes.
Yeah.
The beautiful thing is that as time goes on, it gets easier and easier to romanticize them.
For sure.
Exactly. Absolutely.
I'm so glad there's no recordings of that time. How long have you and Stephanie been together? Because I'm also like intrigued by creative couples who have lifelong partnerships and work together musically and professionally in life.
We're not 100% sure because we were in other relationships. There may have been some overlap. I'm thinking maybe 1989 or so.
Okay.
I had seen Stephanie play. She was in a group with my best friend's sister, who was an actress, Mare Winningham, and they had a group. And I saw them playing, and Stephanie was playing piano and singing. They had kind of a McGarrigle Sisters thing, and I just looked at her and was like, wow. And then later, there was a kind of a back room of a bar called the Albion, and they had we put on gigs there on the weekends, and we did a kind of a in-the-round song swap thing with me and Patrick Winningham, who later wrote some songs for the Counting Crows, and Steve Yerke, just an incredible songwriter who loved to argue about songwriting, and he always won. And Stephanie would play accordion and sing harmony, and that was really the beginning of our relationship musically and otherwise. And, there's been a lot of gigs, a lot of this, a lot of that, and it's amazing that it hasn't really broken us apart. It's actually, brought us closer together, I think, because I think that these kind of relationships can get kind of brittle.
Totally.
It's quite the dance to mix the personal and the creative that then becomes the professional, and there's quite a few layers, especially in our situation. I've played in Michaela's band for a long time, so it's just a weird dynamic where Michaela performs under her own name. It's her project, it's her music, she's the front woman, and I'm in service to that. We're in partnership with each other, and there's a big dance to it all.
Yeah, maybe if I had it to do over, I would have maybe formed another band, but I just didn't see that. I didn't see myself as doing that. I kind of thought I had my shot. When I was in Green on Red, we did all those stupid things that bands do. We toured around the world. We made records in LA and Nashville and England, and we had all the battles with the outside world, and then we had all the battles with each other, And I just didn't see being in another band at that time. So I quietly made a couple solo records, and it was something to build on. And played some gigs, and 5 people show up, and next time there's 10 and 12, and it started making a little bit more sense. But make a record every 18 months or so, and then try to go out there and give it the college try and do the hand-to-hand combat to take it out to the people. And that's pretty much what it's been, and it's built into something that's pretty solid now.
Yeah, so coming from Green on Red that was touring the world and all of that, and then into the early days of your solo career when you're back to playing small rooms and having to basically start from square one and rebuild, what, if anything, did you find kept you going? Was there any thought of, man, back here, like, what am I doing?
I remember when we were all playing the Albion and I would see some of the same faces at the shows. It felt good. I felt like something's happening here and people are coming back. And then there would be a little line. I remember the guys that I was playing with were like, when are we going to play a real gig? And I thought, well, we're kind of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember even playing Glastonbury with Green on Red, probably 60,000 people, and then 3 days later playing a bar, for 30 people or whatever. I felt like something was happening and the rest of it would take care of itself.
Mm-hmm.
I believed in it.
Has that sustained, or have you ever had times where you've had to reevaluate or think, wait, what's happening? It doesn't feel like it's on an upward trajectory the whole time.
I suppose when you find yourself in a situation where somebody else is defining your success, that can be a struggle. But it's more like, am I lucky enough to pull a few songs out of the air that get me excited about the next chapter? And if I'm lucky enough to do that, then I wake up feeling pretty excited about the day. And that's all I can hope for, really. I had more high-powered management, and it wasn't really a great fit for me. Ultimately, I remember I was playing a gig up in Davis or something and pulled into the parking lot, and the promoter was pulling into the gravel lot at the same time. And he's like, oh, hey, Chuck. I said, oh, hey, I'm here. And he said, sorry, I got a call from your manager. I had to go back to the store to get some non-alcoholic beer for you. And I said, what? Because I was trying to get sober at the time. And so my day-to-day guy at the management company had called the promoter and said, yeah, I don't want any beer backstage. Maybe some non-alcoholic beer. And I thought, wow, that feels nice. Somebody cares about me. So I ended up leaving that management and just working with the day-to-day guy, Dan Kennedy. And he was really my partner in business through all of this stuff. He was a believer. He ended up with a high school math gig and managing me and no other artists. And that took us through all the New West years. And up until just recently when he was retiring from teaching and wanted to keep his options open a little bit in his later years. So we split, but we had a really great run. And that was worth so much more to me than the things I thought I wanted. And we made it happen. We really got into this thing where it's like, well, we're going to make records and we're going to play gigs and we're going to tune everything else out. And that's pretty much what we did. We had no money. We tried to keep the van running. We're trying to pay poor guys in the band, and just trench warfare, just every day, just one foot in front of the other. And of course, I romanticize that time now when he'd say, look, I got you a Texaco card, use this for a while. And then that would burn out and we'd have to get another card, and we were all in. That's the groundwork for what I'm still doing. And I like it.
I love hearing that because, like Michaela mentioned, being in our late 30s and our community being roughly the same age, there's, as we all know, so many gatekeepers in this industry. And so you think, oh, this big name booking agent, or oh, this big name manager, or this whatever, these are who I need on my team to get to where I want to be. And we see with ourselves and with other people in our community that it's like, after we've had the experience of having people with a larger name and a deeper resume, they're like, really, in the end, what it matters is finding somebody like Dan, like you found, somebody that's a believer, that's invested, that's like, cool, let's try these things. Let's try this, what about this? And is hungry and is creative and inventive.
And particularly understands you. I think that's the rub sometimes with like the bigger named management or agents. It's, do they have the capacity, the time, the belief, the interest, and really getting to know each individual artist and what they need, especially depending where they're at in their career, where you're at in your career. There's so much more to it than just, oh, they've done these great things, so they'll be able to do great things for me.
I suppose. I mean, there's a lot to that, and in some ways you just have to take the vow of poverty and get on with it. And another thing that I realized through the years is that we were playing for the bartenders and the soundmen initially, and they liked us. We would see bartenders like, oh yeah, when I saw this on the calendar, I signed up so I could have a shift that night. And we just kind of tuned the rest of it out.
Yeah, there is a really cool camaraderie with the venue staff, the bar staff, especially at places you play all the time. We're in this together. When the lights come up and you see all the shit on the floor, we're here together, still working.
I think every artist has some bad deals in their past. It's not a big deal. I mean, there's a record deal or something and someone says maybe a lawyer should look at it and, spoiler alert, lawyer doesn't like it. Anybody can say no, I think. And I think the thing is that I was probably just game.
Speaking of like the vow of poverty, I was raised on like the Grateful Dead and in my later years, Neil Young, some of these other people all around the San Francisco music scene, Jefferson Airplane, like all of that in kind of the 60s, 70s scene. I always wanted to move to San Francisco, but by the time I was old enough to move there, it would have been 2004 or something, I felt that the city was just kind of unattainable for me. San Francisco is notoriously crazy expensive. Having so many years in the city, how has that affected your creativity and your approach and like your freedom to move and experiment and try things?
San Francisco has been my education in so many ways. Films, there are so many art houses here when I was coming up, when I was 18, 19, in my 20s, there were so many of them. In fact, before I was dating Stephanie, my girlfriend at the time and I got together with Stephanie and her boyfriend, and we decided we were going to go see Godfather 1 and 2 back to back at the York Theater over on York and 24th, if you're ever in San Francisco. I don't know what it is now. It's a nonprofit theater of some kind. But I remember we went in there at like noon, and when we got out, like it was dark. And that's just San Francisco. I don't know what we were doing, if we had jobs. I just think about that. So San Francisco's been my education. When I was living in the suburbs and I was 15 or 16 years old, Joel Biafra was running for mayor. And the local news channels, they just loved him. And they gave him lots of airtime. And he said that if he won, then there would be a statue of Dan White downtown, and we would make money by selling tomatoes that they could throw at the statue. He said that all businessmen would have to wear clown suits, and people took him seriously because he was a kook, But it's been that kind of town. And the Dead Kennedys and a lot of bands in San Francisco, unlike the East Bay, I've noticed, they came out of the Art Institute, whereas in the East Bay, they came out of like Berkeley High, bands with horns, Tower of Power, or ska bands. Mm-hmm. Berkeley was always more educated. Bands that came out of the city were always more conceptual. A lot of people from the Art Institute, the Avengers and the Sleepers and this band called Crime, which I don't know if they ever made a record, but they made great posters and they're still out there. So anyway, I don't know. You were asking me what San Francisco means to me creatively. It's everything. Stephanie and I, we live in the Castro. So local politics, we have a heightened awareness of these things, filmmakers and music. And I used to play a guitar with this comedian when I was 18, Barry Sobel, who went on to write for SNL and things. And I think I saw Dan McCarvey like working on the Church Lady skit. I think I saw some incredible things, and I learned a lot from being around those comedians. In retrospect, they might have 5 minutes they were working on, and they would go and change one little thing, and that would be a huge leap of faith to them. And I would think, well, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it was. And so I played with Barry, and he ended up doing Carson, I think, twice, which was a real big deal at the time. So yeah, it's all been part of my education.
How has that changed as the city has changed? And of course, always hearing about like the tech world and extreme wealth and pricing out artists. Have you felt that impact at all in your life and your ability to maneuver?
Yeah, absolutely. In a very real way, there's less musicians out there that are living on the fringes or working on the fringes. I was talking to a friend of mine. I said, well, where's the bass player that bartends a couple nights and also has some students? And he said, oh, Chuck, that sounds like white privilege to me. I said, I don't know what that is. But a lot of that fringe element I feel is gone. But that's all part of it. Some people are against rent control because they think it prices out young people and that the young people can't move into the city because it's cost prohibitive and people are hunkered down in their rent controlled apartments. But when Stephanie and I got our apartment, which is a rent controlled apartment, it was a sketchy neighborhood. It was not like it is today. Now you see nannies generally pushing strollers with twins because somebody probably used a turkey baster and a lot of twins. And you just wouldn't see things like that. And so somebody said it prices out the young people. And I said, well, the young people don't need to go to Brooklyn or Williamsburg or Queens, or they need to go to Daly City or Sonoma County or push it out. That's all part of it.
That's what we've seen. I feel like 15 years ago, we had a lot more friends who lived in San Francisco. And feel like everyone's moved out to different parts of the Bay that I don't think I know anybody anymore who lives in the city except for you, Chuck.
Oh. Well, when I saw you guys play on Valencia Street, that was a short walk for me. Very much a walking city. Yeah, it's everything to me. It's where I invented myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved what you were saying about creative influence and inspiration there. Like, you mentioned a few bands, but mostly you mentioned art houses and film and theater and comedy and all of these other art forms, which is something I really cherish. It's something that I really miss about living in a city like New York or like San Francisco that has such a high caliber of all these other art forms. We're lucky to live in Nashville because of the music community, and obviously it's a opportunity and its accessibility to the music scene far outsizes its actual population, but there's not a ton of other art forms here. There's no major art gallery. There's a little tiny film festival that happens every August. There's a comedy club, but it's of no comparison to a city like San Francisco or New York. And I think that's so important for creativity and inspiration.
Well, you got a lot of churches.
That's true.
I just got back from Europe, where they've turned some great churches into great gigs. And I'd like to see more of that.
I know. Yeah. I wanted to go back to something you said when you were talking about staying on your path and like really focusing on your own thing. And you said that the problem can come in when you start letting other people define your success. And I was wondering if you could give some examples of that, when that has come into play and how you've been able to be like, nope, cool, I'm good.
There's success, and then, what you can measure in money, and money's wonderful. But there's also how hard it is just to write a song you're proud of or make a record that you believe in. You got to please yourself. And as far as a team, it's good to have a team, a label and a publisher and a bookkeeper and whatever you can do to move this stuff down the road. But as far as the people and what their expectations are, you just don't know. Until you're in bed with somebody, you really don't know if they're good or bad or honest. And I think that's just all part of it. Everybody's going to get into business with people that maybe it doesn't go great. But like I said earlier, anybody can say no. It doesn't really make you smart.
I think that's an important point to bring up, because someone's idea who is potentially working for you, whether it's an agent or a management or a label, and their definition of what they deem successful if it's based purely on numbers, attendance, fans, whatever, money, it cannot align with yours. And that doesn't mean that you're not as successful as you should be. But I think it's challenging to protect yourself from the kind of like mental challenge and emotional challenge if you're not deemed as successful as somebody might want you to be in bed with you, essentially. And I think the really important thing is to know for yourself what is successful. I come back to that a lot of like, when I go on tour, was it good only if it was like more tickets sold than I thought? Or is it like the stories and the connections and experiences that I got to have because of the tour? I think of that San Francisco show that you came to, that was like right when the pandemic hit. I think the city shut down.
Like a week later.
I got a t-shirt. I still have it.
That was such a treasured memory because of meeting you, Chuck, and not because I was like, oh my God, Chuck Prophet came to my show, but because then I went home and listened to your records incessantly and became a huge fan, and your music had an impact on my life. And so it's like those little connections of like what introduces you to something, what, furthers or deepens your inspiration, all of that stuff. I think we have to take into account as artists of how that feeds our idea of feeling like a success versus did I sell more tickets and do I have the big people thinking I'm a success and all of that stuff.
I know that my having been signed and dropped so many times and had these relationships with labels, I remember when I was between record deals maybe 20 years ago, I called over to Cooking Vinyl because I think I'd made a record for them, and then I left to go to New West for a couple records. And then when I was a free agent again, went through all that and shook myself off, I called over to Cooking Vinyl. I remember I spoke to Martin Goldschmidt, the president or the owner of the label, and I said, well, this is what's going on. I'm working on this record and I'm kind of looking for a home. And he said, well, hold on a second. He said, I'll call you back. So he called me back like 10 minutes later and he said, yeah, I just walked around the office and asked people if they like working with you. And they said, most of them said they like working with you. Why don't we do something? I think he was just looking for something that wasn't going to bring drama. And I think that was, for me, some maturity, that I had matured in the sense that I was better at working with people. I worked with different bands. I worked with this band, the Rubinoos, and they were childhood heroes of mine. When I was in high school, I went and probably saw them 25 times. They'd been on American Bandstand. They had gone to England and had a hit record and played on the Old Grey Whistle Test. And so I work with them now, and the singer, John, is constantly doing things. I have to tell him, John, this is in the 70s. We don't have these relationships like that anymore. Where everybody's out to get each other. It's like you're going to have to just soften up a little bit. Not antagonistic, but what do you call that? Litigious or whatever. Those kinds of relationships.
Adversarial?
Yeah, adversarial. Thank you. Not really interested in adversarial relationships, but it's the bread and butter of the old school.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. That makes me think a lot about some relationships I've had with older people in this industry.
Sure.
Did that kind of become a helpful part of your definition of like positive working relationships rather than just making decisions based on that versus what you think that they'll get from it?
Well, I also like to think that I matured a little bit. I got sober somewhere along the line, 1997 to be exact, and I think I've grown and matured, and all that stuff comes into play. I think I'm a little bit less of an asshole.
That helps. It's funny how that feels like a common theme as well in just this business. Maybe it's all businesses, and I only have ever worked in the music business, so I don't know, but I feel like that's a positive of getting older in an industry that often really treasures youth. But I've had friends, acquaintances in bands where we're all getting older. And I remember one of them, I won't name him by name so that it's anonymous, but he mentioned he used to be an asshole. And I thought about it and I was like, yeah, you were. I was like, and I just accepted it. And I was like, what happened, And his explanation was just like, life happened. He started growing up. He had some hard knocks. And I think that's a helpful thing to stay on this path because so much is also about community and relationships.
In the immortal words of Andy Warhol, you're trying to get people to pay for something they don't need.
Yeah, the ego that has to come into play sometimes when you're trying to get people to pay attention to you.
You got to entertain yourself, and maybe other people will find it entertaining. And if it's fun and you're having fun doing it, people pick up on that.
Yeah, bringing it back to seeing bands on stage, you can tell when the band isn't getting along. You can feel that on stage. You can feel that energy. And if they're up there having a great time, you can feel that too.
Yeah, and having said that, sometimes I wish there were some assholes up there. Sometimes I wish I was watching somebody that was laying it all on the line, and just trying to express themselves. And there's something going on beyond the music. I'm not saying that I'm so well adjusted now, but there has been a kind of increase in well-adjusted people in music. Just a lot of nice people and super well-adjusted, and they probably did very well in high school, and they were part of the entertainment council. And I remember those kids. I remember seeing school plays and thinking how do they get in this play? I would have liked to have done something like this. Where was I? So, it's not all good. It used to be dangerous. And I don't know that being in a band is particularly dangerous anymore. It's funny. There's these kind of up with people bands, came out of Canada and stuff, and just nice people. It's boring.
That's hilarious.
We're going to start the master class now.
Yeah.
Well, we want to be surprised. And to get people out of the house and to get them somewhere to pay money, to get a babysitter or whatever, I think they want to be surprised. I think they want some electricity. I don't know.
There's this saying that I love that is, if you do what you've done, or if you do what's been done, you're going to get what you have. And it all just ends up feeling pedestrian, like you said.
The things that have worked for me have always been out of the blue. In fact, I was talking to an engineer here in San Francisco, and he was talking about recording the Dead Kennedys. And he said that when they came in, the studio gave him the gig because it was all vintage gear, and he was the only guy that really understood it. And they said, you understand the gear. We can't have things breaking down. These guys are we don't want trouble with these guys. He agreed to engineer the session. The Dead Kennedys came in, very suspicious of the whole corporate rock atmosphere. John Cunaberti's his name, by the way. Great guy. He's a mastering engineer and does great work. He said when they came in, he was in the control room and they were playing, and he was like, this is a joke, right? Somebody's pranking me. And he was convinced that it was a joke. And then he went to see the Dead Kennedys live, and he began to understand it. But the music that he grew up on, and he later did the Joe Satriani records, the music he was interested in and the path that he thought was the serious path of music ended up being 180 degrees from where he ended up, because everybody wants his sound after the Dead Kennedys singles. Everybody wanted his sound. It was just dumb luck, and it was random, and there's a million of those stories.
Yeah.
It's kind of an Alan Watts kind of thing, the philosopher, thinker, talker. He talks about controlled chaos, just grabbing the wheel and yanking it to the left and changing everything and just seeing what happens. And the world just exists on controlled chaos, and being able to do that with intention almost, to shake things up and to free things up.
I agree with that concept when my hands are on the wheel.
For sure. Important note.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Chuck.
I enjoy your podcasts. I did a little poking around, as you do.
Oh, thank you.
And I enjoyed listening to you guys and enjoyed your guests, and it's interesting. I'm happy to be included, and I appreciate the attention.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time.
Okay, kids. Well, it's been fun. Keep smiling.
Thank you so much, Chuck.
Take care. See ya.
Hey, real quick before we wrap up today's episode, it takes a lot to produce even a small show like ours, so if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider taking a minute to check out our Patreon. There's a lot happening over there, all with the intent of growing our community and offering you more resources to navigate a career based on your art more sustainably. You can learn more at the link in the show notes below. Thanks for being here with us, and we'll catch you next time on the Other 22 Hours podcast.